From the very beginning, in 1967, I was searching, and I found a leaflet blowing in the wind that looked like a letter, and I picked it up, and thinking I was going to read someone else's mail, and it was "Stay high, no more coming down" leaflet. Tune in, turn on, and drop out. And Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta, and I thought, oh, Swami, and I pictured Prabhupada was going to have long hair and a beard. And I showed up at the temple, and the first picture I saw was stuck in the temple window at 518 Frederick. His prospectus for the Bhagavatam, the picture, his passport picture. I was aghast. He didn't look like what I thought a Swami would look like. He looked severe and it was not. I was scared, and I later heard Prabhupada answer. Someone approached him about that photograph or something. He didn't look happy, and Prabhupada said that it was the most ecstatic moment in my life. It was my passport, so that he was able to fulfill Bhaktisiddhanta's injunction for him.
So my first meeting with Srila Prabhupada was in March of 1971. And I have to give a little bit of the history so we can understand the circumstances. I had a friend, John, who's now Yadubara Das, and he and I were in college together, majoring in photography. I was an undergraduate and he was a graduate student. So he decided to do his master's thesis on the Hare Krishna people. And he went to India sometime in the winter of 1970. And after he had been there a few months, he wrote to me and said I should come and join him. So I did that, and that's how I arrived in Bombay in March of 1971. Now in college I had done a term project on close-up photography. And I'd taken that term project to a publisher in New York, and it gradually evolved into a small book about close-up photography, a kind of a specialty book. So when I went to India, I brought that with me. So about a day after I had arrived in Bombay, John said we should go and meet the Swami. At that time, the devotees had a temple in a building called Akash Ganga, which was right by the ocean. And the temple was on the 7th floor. So it was a very, when we went into Prabhupada's room on the 7th floor of Akash Ganga, immediately it was a very kind of a spacious, airy feeling because the windows were open, the sea breeze was blowing through, a lot of natural light, very nice. And the room was very simple. Prabhupada sat on a white, small cushion behind a table, as he traditionally did. Very relaxed. So I was there with John, and John introduced me and explained who I was a little bit. And then he took the book, my book, which I had under my arm, and said to Prabhupada, "Here, she has done this." So Prabhupada very graciously and gentlemanly-like took the book, and he looked through it for a minute, thumbing through the pages, and then he handed it back and said, "We do not know much about these things." I actually was considering when I brought the book that here's a saintly person, why should I show a saintly person a book about close-up photography? It didn't seem appropriate. So by saying that, Prabhupada confirmed my idea that it wasn't really appropriate, but it was I had the impression of a very peaceful, I wouldn't say transcendental, I wasn't thinking that way at all, but pleasant person to be around.
Well, the first time I saw Prabhupada was in, was it 72, in Boston. It's hard to keep track of all the years now. You know, I wasn't well prepared for this. But I had been in the movement for about, it was about 72. I'd been in the movement for about 15 months when I took initiation. I saw Prabhupada about a month before I took initiation. And that was in Boston. And I'd read Prabhupada's books, and I enjoyed them a lot. Especially the Bhagavatams, the old Bhagavatams, all the spelling and grammatical imperfections, but boy, the perfection was in the sincerity. I remember reading the books and thought, gee, I don't know so many of the details, but I know God could never overlook somebody this sincere. I really trusted Prabhupada's sincerity. And then I saw him when he came off the plane in Boston, and it was just pretty magical. He came off, and it was an open outdoor ramp. He came off, and it was the end of the day, so there was beautiful golden sun on Prabhupada. And for first time seeing live, it was really dramatic. But still, there was a part of me that was very cynical. You know, a lot of people became devotees because they were kind of burnt out on people and life. And so I wasn't sure. There's a part of me that was cynical about Prabhupada too. And so now I was going to see the spiritual master. You know, I read his books and all. And he came in and into the airport, and they gave him this big lotus garland. And as I understood it, Petit Duran had swiped a whole bunch of lotuses from the Boston Botanical Gardens. They made this huge garland that was really heavy. They put it on Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada, there was a bunch of reporters there, and Prabhupada turned to the reporters, and he posed for them. And this was like, from my cynical side, this is like checking him out, right? And being a photographer, you see how much people really enjoy being photographed. They enjoy being the center of attention and all. And you can kind of read it in their eyes. And it was kind of interesting with Prabhupada, because when he turned to face the photographers, you know, he posed, but there wasn't a whole lot of ego in it. It was like he was a diplomat posing for Krishna. He was a diplomat from Krishna Loka posing. So it was real interesting to watch that, you know. There wasn't a big ego trip involved, and that kind of very much impressed me. And then Prabhupada went to the temple. He was supposed to, they rented a room for him at the Sheraton. And he decided he didn't want to go there. He said it was like a brothel. These hotels were like brothels. So he went to the temple, and the temple, it was real noisy. There were devotees that came from New York and from Montreal. And this was the Beacon Street Temple. And it used to be a funeral parlor. So it was kind of a small house, relatively speaking, for that many people. And Prabhupada had the room he got was just a bare room with a thick foam pad and a little dais for him to sit at. And that was it, and he was happy. For him, it was much more what he wanted than a fancy hotel suite at the Sheraton. He wanted to be with Krishna, the deities. He wanted to be with the devotees. So that was pretty impressive, too.
In 1972, in the House of Flowers, I believe it was October, just after Rath Yatra, it might have been September of 1972, I was at a lecture that Srila Prabhupada was giving. And this lecture was kind of significant. Bhutatma was fanning Srila Prabhupada on a stage. There were maybe 1,000, 1,200 people there. An indoor auditorium with a stage. And Bhutatma was fanning Srila Prabhupada with a peacock fan. And the handle of the peacock fan was more than 12 feet long. It was this humongous, like something out of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. And as they were fanning Srila Prabhupada, I was trying to listen very carefully. It was hard at first to understand what Srila Prabhupada was saying. But I remember specifically there was one point that Srila Prabhupada had come to at the question and answer section of his lecture that really gave me inspiration that here is my guru. Because previously I was, like everyone else, looking for so many spiritual masters, going through TM and Autobiography of a Yogi and Baba Ram Dasa and everything. And when Srila Prabhupada spoke, at one point in the question and answers, one young man stood up and said, Swamiji, according to the teachings of Baha'i, Srila Prabhupada interrupted and said, we are not talking here of Baha'i, we are talking of Krishna. And he said, well, Bahula says, and Prabhupada interrupted him immediately again, we are interested in here, and we are talking here of what Krishna says. And then he said again, well, the Baha'i faith, and Prabhupada said, please sit down and be quiet. We are speaking only what Krishna says. And to me, at that time, when I'd seen all these other bogus yogis and they were accepting everything and putting everything together as one, I was never very attracted. And when I heard that Prabhupada was so decisive and strict and very forceful, I immediately thought that this is my guru. I want to take initiation from this spiritual master. So then I joined sometime later. That's another story, but that impressed me very much, that first meeting with Srila Prabhupada in the House of Flowers.
Now it so happens that Prabhupada came to my parents' home. My father was like a senator, a member of parliament. It's a very senior position in the government. And I was surprised when my mother phoned me at the office and she said, don't forget to come a little early for lunch. I said, why should I come early? She said, we are going to have guests, very important guests. So we said, fine. My father and I, instead of coming home at about 1, we came at 12:30. And when we entered our own home, we heard these devotees singing and dancing the Mahamantra. Now, mind you, at that time, I was a disciple of a Mayavadi, a very, very senior Mayavadi. His name was, as you know, this guy, everybody knew in India as a person who was a very anti-Prabhupada person. And his name was Chinmayananda Swami. So I was shocked to see these Westerners dressed with dhotis and saris, with tilaks, singing and dancing and just behaving as if they own my house. And they were all over the place. And my mother was loving this. She enjoyed this. And here was my father, who was quite senior. He was tolerant. He appreciated what Prabhupada was doing. And then after the kirtan and everything was over, they went and sat in the library room. And the first thing I remember Prabhupada told my father is, my disciples are getting a very bad name in India, and they're getting investigated by the CBI in India as if they are CIA members. This was in 1971. And they're having harassments. They don't get their visas. They sometimes are deported. They are sometimes arrested and things like this. And he said, these disciples of mine, they get up so early in the morning, they chant the rounds, they attend Mangalarti, they attend the classes, they're doing so much service for Krishna. Why don't you go in Parliament and get that investigation stopped? And all my disciples must have long-term visas. My father said, let me see what I can do. I could see what Prabhupada was doing. He was getting my family into devotional service. The next thing Prabhupada said was, you see this young man here? And all the eyes were on him. He's about 15 years old, and he was originally an associate with Lord Chaitanya. And my heart, I said, this is a con man. This guy really knows how to speak. And I was a Mayavadi follower. And I was, looking very, very carefully at Prabhupada, examining him. Then he said a very strange thing. He told my father, do you think you can adopt him and make him an Indian citizen? And my heart just sank. And that gentleman was Jai Pataka Swami. And my father said, let me see what I can do. During the course of the next few months, Prabhupada made my father a life member. I believe his number is 32. Today, of course, there are more than 25 or 30,000 life members in India alone. And Prabhupada gave his own personal books, the Bhagavad Gita, which he always kept with him. He gave his personal Krishna books, the Dinapan 2-volume Krishna books, his copy of Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and I think Nectar Devotion and so on. And I was surprised my father gave a lot of money to Prabhupada. I thought, this man's really captured my father. Makes him do work, takes away all his money. And then I was telling my father, we better talk in the next room a little bit. I was about 31-year-old. My father at that time must have been close to about 60 years old. So I told him, what are you doing? This man comes in our house and he's virtually asking you to do everything for him. And my father said, he's doing a very, very important duty. He is like the Vedic ambassador. He's spreading Indian culture. And nobody's done this before. And I appreciate it. And I'm going to help him. So, obviously, Prabhupada had captured the hearts of my parents. It's just the reverse of what I hear in this part of the world, where Prabhupada captured the hearts of the younger man, and it was the parents who were complaining about the younger man. Here was the opposite case. The young man was complaining about the relationship Prabhupada had already built with my parents.
I remember asking a question, because I got from the, I don't remember the lecture, but I got from it that he was having bhakti yoga. And so I want to know if one could practice hatha yoga. And he looked at me and he said, hatha yoga? He said, why? And he, you know, it was serious and severe, and I felt this small. And then he said, we're, you know, bhakti yogis. And then I forget how he did it. His quality. He said something and made me feel wonderful. And I went every day. I couldn't get the mantra out of my mind. And within a week or two, I was initiated. And I was just getting initiated. And I was scared. I forgot my name during the initiation. I couldn't remember. Even then, my memory was poor. I had to go upstairs and ask. And when I gave Prabhupada some useless things, he said they were useless, told me. It's funny, because you're supposed to give dakshina, you know, or something to your spiritual master. And I was sentimentally attached to a baby blanket, and I forget what else, and he held them up and he said, these things are useless. And I felt bad again. But the next day, he had used them for sitting places for visitors. And then he found out, he said, you're living with a young woman? And I said, yes. He goes, that's not good now. He said, you come live with me. And so from the very beginning. And I guess that started it. He didn't need much doing for in those days. As a matter of fact, he would cook, and devotees conveniently found a way to be in his room about lunchtime, because who was ever there, he gave one chapati with some sabji on it, and it was the most delicious foodstuffs we'd ever tasted.
Well, my initiation took place November 29th, 1971. And at the time, Prabhupada had taken a group of devotees to Vrindavan, India. And he had, before the initiation, he had personally given us a tour of the different holy places, which was truly wonderful. He took us to Brisana. At that point, he rode on the palanquin. The devotees carried on a palanquin around Brisana. And he took us to Govardhan Hill. And he bathed with us in the Jamuna. It was an extraordinary time. So this time of our initiation, it was early in the morning on the 29th of November, quite a cold time in Vrindavan. And there was another couple who wanted to get married at the same ceremony. Yadabar and I were going to be married, and I was going to be initiated. And this other couple, the husband-to-be, approached Prabhupada saying that he also wanted to marry this woman. The unfortunate part about it was that he had already been married to a devotee, and he had left that woman. And this second proposed wife was already pregnant. So it was a, rather a dishonorable, more than rather, it was a dishonorable circumstance. But at the same time, so from that point of view, Prabhupada couldn't say yes. But from another point of view, he couldn't say no because the first wife was already gone. The second proposed wife was already pregnant. So how could he say no? It became an enigma. And he resolved it in the most brilliant way. I forever am impressed the way he resolved this problem. Gurudas was doing the ceremony, the actual fire sacrifice. So he instructed Gurudas to do the entire ceremony for this other couple first. From the mantras and the achman and the bananas in the fire, everything was done, the cloth was tied together. And at that point, Gurudas started a second, separate fire sacrifice for my initiation in our wedding. And at that point, Prabhupada came out of his room and sat on the Vyasasana. So without saying anything, he made a very clear statement. It was, what can you say, it was a genius, just a genius solution to a very uncomfortable situation. So the ceremony went on, and at the end, Prabhupada asked me the 4 rules and regulations for the initiation part of it. So I managed, I had rehearsed that, so I managed to explain what they were. And then he said, how many rounds every day? So I said 16, feeling very confident of myself. And he looked at me right in the eyes, and although we had looked at each other before this was the first time it was at such close distance. And that was since that was the first of several times after that this happened, it was a most memorable experience. Prabhupada's eyes were dark, and they seemed bottomless, truly bottomless. And at the same time, I felt for the first time in my life, and only with him, that he saw way past the obvious, way past the body, and even past the mind. He could actually perceive my consciousness, which, it's a little discomforting because my consciousness was far from what it should be, unfortunately. So you could say it was a penetrating look, but ordinarily, when you use the word penetrating, it connotes maybe critical or judgmental, but it was none of those things. It was a very kind, gentle look. And at that time, since it was the first time, I was quite surprised by how perceptive I felt he was. And in the future, when he used to look at me, my reaction would be that, first of all, that I was not where I should be in terms of my Krishna consciousness. But rather than being discouraged, I wanted to increase, to try to please him by my Krishna consciousness from his very perceptive look. So when I said 16, and he gave me that look, right, eye to eye at such close distance, and then he said, that is the minimum. 16 is the minimum. So now I just do the minimum. At least I do the minimum. But anyway. And then it was time for him to give me my name. I was the only initiate, so he hadn't bothered to think of a name. It was rather insignificant. So he asked Shamsundar, do we have a Visakha? After a moment of thinking. So Shamsundar went to another room. Apparently they had some record of all the initiates. And he looked it up, and he came back and told Prabhupada, there is a Visakha, but she's left. So Prabhupada turned to me and said, your name is Visakha.
When I first started photographing, I had Canon cameras, the single lens reflexes. So that has a little mirror slap. The mirror goes up when the picture is taken. So it makes kind of a loud noise. So Prabhupada asked me not to take pictures while he was speaking. So he said, no more cut while I'm speaking. So later on we got a little bit more prosperous. We got Leica cameras, and they're a different style. They don't have the flapping mirror. And the next time Prabhupada chastised me, he said, no more ch-ch while I'm speaking. So he had a very fine sense of hearing and a very fine sense of smell. And I'd gone to London and I was photographing Prabhupada. And I didn't really have close contact with him so when I was leaving to go back, I'd gone to Amsterdam with him, and to Paris and London. And I really wanted some personal attention. I mean, part of us were like students of philosophy, and part of us were like little kids. So I couldn't help myself, and I went into Prabhupada's room at Bury Place before I left, and I said, Prabhupada, I'm leaving to go back to America to work on your books. And I expected Prabhupada, he didn't really know me, he just saw me photographing, and there was a few words back and forth. So I expected Prabhupada to be a gentleman and say something, you know, gentlemanly, kindly. And when I said that, Prabhupada said, you are leaving? Ah. And he really meant it. It was like this family thing. It's like he knew me, and he really recognized me. So that kind of shocked me. And then he got up and he took his garland and he walked across the room and he put his garland on me. So that really shocked me. So there I was standing in front of Prabhupada, and it's just like he had this ability to look through you, and he can see your, you know, your subtle body, your mind. He can see so many aspects of you that you couldn't see, or that you could see and you didn't want anybody else to see. But there you are, standing naked before him, in a sense, psychically naked. And he sees it all, and he still loves you. And beyond that, he sees you as you can't even see yourself. It's like a doctor or somebody coming in to an amnesiac's room, and they recognize them. But the patient themselves, the person with amnesia, doesn't even know themselves. So that was the kind of feeling I was getting. And he was seeing all the, I guess, you know, the impurities in my own mind. And it was okay. He loved me beyond all this. He saw me not as my subtle mind and all, as my body, but he saw me on such a deep level. And he loved me, and it really touched me.
At another time in 1976, Upendra Prabhu had asked us to guard Srila Prabhupada's door in Vrindavan, which was a great honor to be able to guard Srila Prabhupada's door. At the same time, no one ever thought Srila Prabhupada would come out and say anything or have any conversation. We were rank and file devotees. No big guns, no one who was in a GBC meeting or made any decisions, especially at that time. Rank and file Prabhus. And so Srila Prabhupada was in his rooms in Vrindavan, and it was the time for all the devotees to go to the Fogal Ashram for prasadam, 12:30, 1 o'clock. I was sitting on the porch. I didn't know what Prabhupada's rooms were like at that time. Neither did I know if any other servants were there. And all of a sudden there was a buzzer from inside the room. And I kept reading. It was the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. I thought, this is wonderful. I'm in Vrindavan. I'm reading the Bhagavatam. Prabhupada's in his room. He just rang the buzzer. Some servant from somewhere is going to go and take care of it. You know, everything's so wonderful in Vrindavan. And all of a sudden, within a few seconds, Srila Prabhupada was at the screen door, there in his quarters in Vrindavan. And I immediately stood up. I went to offer obeisances, and Prabhupada said, I am an old man, and I am ringing, and you are a young man, and I must come to you? And my heart, I looked at you, Prabhupada, I had no idea. I tried to explain, you know, that I was new to this job. I had no idea what was the room. And Prabhupada said, I am the spiritual master, and you are the disciple, and I must come to you? And again, I couldn't even say anything. I was struck. Prabhupada said, I am the master, and you are the servants, and there are 6 of you. I couldn't even understand what Prabhupada was talking about. There are 6 of us. And I must come to you? And then Prabhupada said, go get Pusta Krishna. So I knew Prabhupada went back in his room, and I knew adrenaline was flowing like anything. I had barely ever had any association with Srila Prabhupada face to face. And Srila Prabhupada was, this was one of the first encounters, and I had blown it major. So I immediately was ready to run to go get Pusta Krishna Maharaj at the Fogal Ashram. But I realized that if I left my guard, my post as guard, that something could happen and I would be responsible. So I was waiting for some devotee to come by. One devotee came by. I yelled at him, please come quickly. We've got to get Pusta Krishna. Prabhupada needs him. And unfortunately, he said, no entiendo, Prabhu. He spoke only Spanish. At the time, I didn't speak too much Spanish. And the buzzer rang again. So I ran into Srila Prabhupada's quarters. I had never been there before in Vrindavan. I offered obeisances, and as I'm offering obeisances, Prabhupada said, where's Pusta Krishna? So I immediately stood up before I finished my obeisances because I didn't want Prabhupada to have to wait for my answer. I was feeling very foolish. I didn't know what to do, which way to go, what to say. And I told Srila Prabhupada, he's at the Fogel ashram taking prashadam. Prabhupada said, go in the back and get one of the other servants. So as I walked in the back, there are two doorways. One leads to the back of Vrindavan, Prabhupada's rooms in Vrindavan. One leads to the servants' quarters. And unfortunately, I entered the servants' quarters. And Srila Prabhupada said, no, the other door. And I realized then that one should feel like a fool in front of the spiritual master, but one shouldn't act like a fool before the spiritual master. So I went and I got, Harisari was there in the back, preparing some prasadam, doing some devotional service for Srila Prabhupada. And I told him, Srila Prabhupada needs you immediately, you've got to come quickly, it's an emergency. He said, okay, go around through this little doorway, go around the front again, and keep guarding, and I'll tell you what to do, I'll go take care of everything. I'll go talk to Srila Prabhupada. So I went to my post, and I was still reading the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, but this time my eyes were bugged out of my head. I couldn't even read a word. I was looking at the pages, but my mind was reeling in complete anxiety that I had offended Srila Prabhupada. I hadn't pleased him. What an opportunity. And here I had blown it in service of my spiritual master. So Pusta Krishna Maharaj at that time came back, and he told me, you'll do something nice for Prabhupada. We found out that Prabhupada wanted to go to Bhagaji's across the way for lunch prasadam. It wasn't as big as an emergency as I had thought. Although Srila Prabhupada needed the arrangements to be made. So Pusta Krishna Maharaj told me that just hold this nice umbrella. There was a very big umbrella with a 3-foot, 4-foot pole. Hold it over Srila Prabhupada's head and you can do some nice service, walk Srila Prabhupada over to Bhagaji's house. So as I'm getting prepared to do that, Srila Prabhupada was coming out in a few minutes, the kirtan started. A few sannyasis came by, and two of the senior sannyasis, at that time Guru Kripa Maharaj and Yasodhananda Swami, came by and saw me with the pole and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, Srila Prabhupada's coming out, and I'm going to put the umbrella over his head and walk him to Bhagaji's. And of course, being a brahmachari, they pulled rank immediately, took the umbrella from my hands, and they were going to perform that service, which was only appropriate. So then I'm walking down the stairs, joining in the kirtan, maybe half a dozen devotees, 10 devotees there, and I realized that Krishna was just arranging, there was nothing I can do to please my spiritual master, that I had just blown a great opportunity. So I was actually crying. I think physically I was crying. As Srila Prabhupada came out, I offered dandabats on the stairs, 3-4 stairs going to the gate, leading outside to go to Bhagaji's across the alley in Vrindavan. And as I'm offering obeisances, offering dandabats, Srila Prabhupada's coming down the stairs. I didn't even plan it. As I'm coming up, I was crying, my mind was reeling, that Prabhupada, please forgive me, I'm so sorry that I offended you or didn't know how to act properly. And as I stood up, hands folded, Srila Prabhupada looked over and said, Jai. To me. I knew it was to me. Prabhupada said, Jai. And I knew at that moment, all the anxiety, all the fear, all the tears were all washed away. I became completely joyous because I knew that Srila Prabhupada knew my heart. He knew my intentions and that he was forgiving me for whatever offense that I had committed. And then Srila Prabhupada went on to Bhagaji's, and I was in ecstasy for the rest of that day at least.
But Prabhupada had a very soft corner for me, because I used to go and meet Prabhupada and argue with him. I'll tell you what happened. Prabhupada came and lived just exactly in the opposite building at Nepensi Road leading to Warden Road. It's called the Sea Face Park. And every day I could see Prabhupada because he was there. This was before the Juhu temple was built or even conceived. And my wife and I used to go there, and out of just respect, I would offer my obeisances and listen to Prabhupada. But I was more following the Mayavad philosophy. And I kept on arguing with Prabhupada. I asked Prabhupada, Prabhupada, look, after all, it's Brahman which is supreme, not Krishna. Brahman takes the form of Krishna, Rama, Narsingh, etc. That's the basic philosophy of Mayavad. And Prabhupada visibly used to get very, very annoyed. And he would put up with my nonsense initially. He would even give prasadam, he would give his association. But he would say, who has told you all these nonsense things? This is all rascaldom. And then I would say, my spiritual teacher is Chinmayanand Swami. Ah, that rascal, the biggest Mayavadi in the world today. Ask him, if he is Narayan, why is he getting old? Why his teeth is falling off? Why his hair is getting grey? Why is he not looking young like Narayan? He's calling himself Narayan, he calls other Mayavadis Narayan, other Mayavadis call him Narayan. This is all nonsense. God is always God, he doesn't become God. We are always Jivatma, we'll always be Jivatma. We are parts and parcels of God, and the part and parcel can never be the same as the complete whole. And I was confused, because Prabhupada's logic seemed quite clear. But I still wanted to make sure that he wasn't conning around, because when you come from a city like Bombay or New York, you meet so many such people. And in India, lots of these so-called spiritual teachers collected money and sold mantras and did all that nonsense. So then I would go back to Chinmayanand Swami. I would say, Swamiji, there's one question. Why do you get old? If you control Mother Nature, Mother Nature has the habit of making everything deteriorate. Why are you getting old? Can you not control that? And he would say, no, I have to look older so that people, respect me more. So I would go back and tell Prabhupada that he has to look older because people will respect him more. Prabhupada would say, that is rascaldom. He can't, he can never, because Mother Nature is under Krishna's control and not under his control. He will always be controlled by nature. You go and tell him that. So I'd go back and I would tell him that. And Prabhupada would usually quote some of the verses from Bhagavad Gita, And like Lord Krishna says, Sarva Bhuteshu Aham Braj Pita, I am the seed-giving father. And he can't be the seed-giving father of everybody. So slowly, over a period of 7 years, I tried to find fault or inconsistency in Prabhupada's books, teachings, tape recordings, etc. I couldn't find a single inconsistency or untruthfulness. There was no duplicity, which is very, very common in people who are doing some sort of variations of religion. But Prabhupada was sticking to the original teachings of Lord Chaitanya, the original teachings of Lord Krishna. It was unique. And eventually it was the point on which Prabhupada asked me, go and ask Chinmayanand Swami to come and argue with me and we can have a debate. So on what point shall we arrange this debate? I asked Prabhupada. So Prabhupada said, we are going to debate on the point, is Chinmayanand Swami going to lift the Govardhan hill or not? If he's God, he should be able to do that. God did it. And if he knows what's in my mind and everybody's mind, then he is God, he is Paramatma. But if he only knows the restricted thing about his own body, that too to some extent, not fully, He's just another human being who's trying to cheat God, and he's trying to cheat everyone else. I went and told Chinmayan Swami, are you prepared to have this debate? We can arrange this debate. It'll once and for all resolve this awful doubt I have now as to which of you two are the real spiritual master, as you say in America, who's the real McCoy. And so it was that Chinmayan Swami refused to attend this debate. And I asked Chinmayan Swami, can you please tell me whether you can know what's in the minds of everyone? Because God says, Paramatma, I am in everyone. So He knows what's going on. Can you do that? For instance, do you know what, I'll sit down now and I'll do some thinking, something different. Would you be able to write down what I'm thinking about? And he says, no, I can't, I'm not a mind reader. I said, no, we are not talking about reading minds. I'm talking about if you are really at a so-called elevated level where you are one with God, then you should know that. It's somewhat like, you plugged yourself into a computer which has all the memory of so many facts, and you should be able to retrieve that, information. So I asked him that, and he just couldn't do it. And then I surrendered to Prabhupada. I became his driver.
I guess in one of his lectures I got that that marriages, men and women remain separate, or the ideal is to be brahmachari. And I said, well, if the marriages are arranged, I said, how do you learn to come to love a woman before you get married? And he said, love. He said, love is for Krishna. And he walked to the window and looked down on the street, and he said, you want a woman? Pick one. And I said, no, Srila Prabhupada.
And after the initial meeting, John and I had this idea. We were very young and idealistic. So we had an idea that we would do a photo essay about a quaint Indian village and make a cultural presentation that people could appreciate traditional life in India. So we thought this was a wonderful idea. We were beside ourselves with our own brilliance. But the problem was, of course, in India there are thousands upon thousands of villages. And we had no idea which one would be the most suitable for a story like that, a photo essay. So John said, well, Srila Prabhupada's from India, and he's traveled extensively. We should ask him where to go. So we went that morning back to Akash Ganga, and again into Srila Prabhupada's room, and John presented to him our idea. So Prabhupada looked at us. I'm sure we were flushed with the fervence and of our idea and the enthusiasm that comes with such a young age. And he said, wherever you go, they will simply cheat you and steal your cameras. So from our body language, we must have been crestfallen. We didn't say anything. And there was quite a pregnant pause. And he looked at us. And then he said, best that you go to Vrindavan and do your photo essay in Vrindavan. So some months later we did that. Not right away, but maybe 4 or 5 months later. We actually did that. And probably the most remarkable thing about that pastime with Srila Prabhupada is that Srila Prabhupada had only seen me twice, and he knew nothing about me. And unfortunately, I came from an atheistic background. My parents were atheists, and until I went to the temple in New York, about a year or so before I met Srila Prabhupada, I had never been in any church or temple or any sort of religion, not even to see the stained glass. That's how bad it was. So he, by his instruction to go to Vrindavan, now looking back on that decades later, there was nothing more appropriate he could have said to me, because that month that we spent in Vrindavan was truly transformational for me. I would wander the streets, and everywhere you go, of course, there are temples, and even beyond the temples was the piety and the spirituality of the residents of Vrindavan. Everyone's saying Jai Radhe and has devotion foremost in their lives. So what can you say? That instruction of Prabhupada could not have been more appropriate.
I said, Prabhupada, I said, sometimes I fight with my god brothers. Is that bad? He said, no, not necessarily. And then I asked Prabhupada, I said, Prabhupada, sometimes I have problems and the spiritual master isn't there and it's too detailed for the scriptures. And I said, well, what should I do? And he said, if you chant Hare Krishna very nicely, he said, all the answers will come from within. So I thought that was like a real timeless answer would help a lot of devotees if they heard that.
Lokanath Maharaj was there on the walk. Srila Prabhupada had asked him at one point of the walk what these particular type of berries on the side of the road were. And Lokanath Maharaj was describing that these are such and such berries. Great yogis and sannyasis subsist on the berries, perform meditation and subsist on these berries for their foodstuffs only. Prabhupada said, yes, our men should learn how to do like this. Chant Hare Krishna, eat a few berries, and once in a week, go down to the village and beg a chapati from the village. So the devotees were looking at each other because sometimes Srila Prabhupada would give instructions that would change everyone's life forever. Go to China or who knows. Srila Prabhupada was our guru, he could say anything. So immediately a few of the GBC men, maybe some of the householders, said, Prabhupada, we have to preach, we have to go back and perform our activities. Prabhupada said, no, you should learn to be able to do like this. Chant Hare Krishna, eat few berries, sit in the forest, and once in a week go down to the village and beg some chapati. And devotees everyone was very silent. They thought, my God, we may have to do this. And then Prabhupada went on to say, of course, Lokanath Maharaj was very happy. He was hoping that this would be, I think he was hoping this would be one instruction as a very austere, saintly person. Prabhupada then said, this is sadhu. This is saintly. We should be able to do like this. This is the life of a sadhu. So that was kind of a significant little pastime with Lokanath Maharaj and Prabhupada.
In Bombay on one occasion, I've forgotten the life member's name, very well-to-do and notable person came to see Prabhupada during massage and brought an expert masseur. And Prabhupada let him try massage on him. I watched, and the man's hands were incredible, and Prabhupada's body was just being better than a machine. It was just the hands, and Prabhupada said, that's all right. And then I took over, and he said, I would rather my disciples. He goes, well, then we could send, and he referring to me, we'll send him to the school, and he can learn. And Prabhupada said, there's no necessity. I don't know if he told it directly to the life member, but after the life member left, he said to me, there's no necessity. Yes, he did say to the life member, I want the love of my disciples. And so that's what the massage helped, but it was mostly the love that we had in our hands, not the technique.
So now Calcutta Temple in those times had many problems. Among them, for instance, the temple was not very clean, kind of reflected the city of Calcutta, and the prasadam was substandard, and perhaps because of these problems and being out of their own culture, the Western devotees fought amongst themselves quite regularly. The way the temple was designed in those days, to go from the office to the prasadam area, which was on the porch, you had to actually walk through the temple room. So I have memories of the GBC and the temple president walking through the temple room arguing with each other about something. This was just an idea of the atmosphere in the temple. There was also tension between the men and the women. There was even one sannyasi who enjoyed leading, but he was very particular about how the various instruments were played. And if he didn't like the way an instrument was being played, he would walk up to the devotee playing it and say, give me that thing, and take it away from the person. So I was thinking during this time, I don't need this in my life. I have other things to do. I should really, just go on with life, get a life, as they say. But the thing that kept me was the mantra, not the Maha Mantra, but the mantra was, Prabhupada is coming. Prabhupada is coming. You can't leave now. He'll be here very soon. So I was hanging on by a very thin thread. And Prabhupada did come in October. And that was extraordinary. He immediately saw the situation. And he had an istagosti. So everyone in the temple came to his room. When I go into that room now, it's the office of the temple president, but I still remember where I sat and where Prabhupada sat. And he gave the most wonderful talk. It was the first time, although I'd heard Prabhupada lecture, I'd never been to an istagosti and I'd never been so affected by someone's talk as I was by this. It was never taped and I didn't take notes. But basically he was talking about tolerance and patience and transcending problems. And at one point I remember specifically he gave the example of his own life. That when he came to New York, he was staying with someone who kept meat in their refrigerator. And the way he said the word meat with such disgust, I realized for the first time how austere that must have been for him. It's a person of such caliber. So when I left at the end of that, I actually felt lighter walking out of that room on that occasion. It was a transformation in my consciousness.
We were going to interview Prabhupada, and he was going not interview, but he was going to speak on what a spiritual master is supposed to be. So he was sitting on the lawn and in the manor, and Yadavara was filming, and I was a sound man because Visakha was away on a preaching engagement. And it was right near a little airport. So every time Prabhupada would stop, because the planes would go over, Yadavara would stop it. Prabhupada would begin, and this happened a few times. And then Prabhupada looks at me, and he goes, "Your machine is useless, and so are you." So I was devastated. And actually, we never finished it. I think Prabhupada lost interest in it because of all the stopping. But still, I was kind of devastated that Prabhupada was so intense, even though he was so tiny. We were so emotional over him. We had such love for Prabhupada, nobody really wanted to displease him. They all felt this great love coming from him, that he really cared about us spiritually. So we didn't want to displease him, and Prabhupada set such high goals for us. And so, excuse me. So it was about a year went by, and I finally got to get to be with Prabhupada again in Mayapur. And I said, "Prabhupada, last year you said I was useless." And Prabhupada said, "Well, you're not useless." He said, "Everybody has some use." So he was really humbling me, It's just part of the spiritual master's job is to break the false ego of the disciple, because we really think we're the center of the universe, And the more we're rooted in that, the more distant we are from our real, true Krishna consciousness, So it's a thankless task of the spiritual master to break the false ego like that. And you do it in little ways like that.
Another time, in '76, in Mayapur, we were in a little room conversation with Srila Prabhupada. He was speaking mostly in Hindi. We were there in the front row. It was a very small room in Sridham Mayapur. And people were being asked to come in and then go out. And Mahabodhi Prabhu was at the door giving people the instruction, who should come in, who should go out. At a certain point during the darshan, a big plate of sweets came into the room. Mahabodhi was holding onto the sweets. A few people noticed it was a very large plate of sweets. So Srila Prabhupada stopped his darshan and asked Mahabodhi, "Why don't you pass out these sweets?" And Mahabodhi responded that, "Well, Srila Prabhupada, I'll pass out the sweets as they all leave, as the devotees leave." And Prabhupada was sitting with one knee up, I remember. We were there in the front row with Tripurari Maharaj. And Prabhupada looked around and said, "Leave? They will never leave." And everybody in the audience was, "Jai Prabhupada!" everyone was considered that that was a blessing that Prabhupada was giving. Of course, making a joke also.
Before I was initiated, before coming to Krishna consciousness, I was arrested for possession of marijuana and things, and we were busted, and I was going to court, and eventually it came time. I pleaded guilty so the woman I got busted with could get off. And so it was time for arraignment, and I forget, Jayananda brought me to court, and they stood before the judge and they sentenced me. I don't think it was that long of a sentence. It was but 3 or 6 months, but I must have went white when the guards came to get me, and the judge said, "You want some time to turn yourself in?" And I said, "Yes, Your Honor." And I flew to LA where Prabhupada was and told him I had to go to jail. And he gave me permission that if I found myself starving in jail, I could eat meat. But I didn't have to. Prisoners were glad to exchange their vegetables for my meat. Those were ecstatic few days. Anyway, it came time for me to leave, and I was scared and frightened. And Prabhupada was sitting on occasion with his legs extended just like this. And so I took the opportunity, and I prostrate myself and put my head, grabbed his feet, and just put them on my head, just embraced them. And he leaned forward and tousled my head, and he says, "Don't worry," he said. "Don't worry, Krishna will let you out after a few days." And he did. The judge, I was in jail, it was horrible. Oh, I had called the jail ahead of time, told them that I was a devotee and that I wanted my religious rights and so on. So they made everyone take everything off, but they let me keep my neck beads because I quoted the warden of the jail that I had permission, and the minute they left me alone. But as I walked by the barber shops, they saw my Visakha, and they snapped their scissors, and they put you in the shower and delouse you, and big prisoners came up, and I was so scared. But they called me in a few days before the judge, and the judge says, I can't remember the words, but you're pious, and you don't have to stay. And just like Prabhupada said, his compassion actually manifested by, he asked Krishna to intercede on my behalf.
I remember another time we were walking in Paris, and Prabhupada turned. He got ahead of the devotees a little bit, and he turned, and he said, "I want you to all to become Krishna-conscious philosophers and defeat these rascal philosophers and scientists." They said it very seriously. And I remember we got back to Bury Place maybe a week or so later. And I was in the room with Prabhupada, Kulashekar. This is very, very charming. Kulashekar is a real nice devotee, very outgoing Leonian. And but his parents were connected to Prabhupada. They came to see Prabhupada. And they were very opposite. They're very quiet people, country kind of people. And Kula had been taking 8mm films of Prabhupada, and he was going to show Prabhupada the films, and he went to get his parents, and we were all going to sit in the room and watch the film together. So when he went out, I remember I looked at Prabhupada and I said, "Prabhupada, these materialistic scientists and philosophers, they're so strongly entrenched. How will they ever change them?" I don't even know how I got the nerve to ask a question like that, but Krishna sometimes does things like that. And Prabhupada looked at me and he said, "Whether they change, whether they do not change, still I will go on with my propaganda work." So you could kind of almost feel the earth shake when he said it. You know, it was so powerful. His determination was just incredible.
As I said, the conditions were not good, so John and I were not feeling comfortable living in the temple there. So at one point, we were together in Prabhupada's room, and John said to Prabhupada, referring to the conditions, perhaps we should live outside and just come to the temple, and in that way we could avoid the problems. So Prabhupada said, yes, you can do that, there is no problem. But even though there's so many problems, still it is better here. So in Calcutta especially that's true, but I think almost that could be said in any temple, in any city.
In 1976 in New Vrindavan, we were fortunate to be in a darshan with Srila Prabhupada. It was the darshans during when Prabhupada was lecturing on the Bhavan Journal, which became the book Civilization and Transcendence. Prabhupada was there were questions from the Bhavan Journal, and Srila Prabhupada was giving the answers outdoors at one householder's place in New Vrindavan, summer of 1976. And during this time, Srila Prabhupada had been lecturing the devotees that they should know the books like a lawyer knows his law books. We should study the books very carefully. And at that time, I believe, 76 summer, it was still 7th canto had just come out. Devotees didn't know most of those verses from the Prahlad pastimes. So Srila Prabhupada came to a point in the lecture where he was giving some discussion on the teachings of Prahlad. And he said, so go find that verse. I think it was maybe Naivodvijay Paraduratya Vaitaranyas, which was new to devotees at that time. 7th canto had just come out. Some verse that was new to devotees. So the sannyasis were feverishly going through the books, Drishtadyumna Maharaj, Kirtananda Swami, because they knew the days previous Srila Prabhupada had become a little bit disturbed when the devotees couldn't find the verses properly, and had given that quote, learn the books like a lawyer knows his law books. So devotees were feverishly looking through the book. They couldn't find it. Maybe 3-4 minutes. Many devotees were here to witness this. I know Naikatma was with us, and many devotees. I think it's even Harisari told this story in his diary. Srila Prabhupada then asked, we were all very amazed, give me the book. They gave Srila Prabhupada the book. He opened the book very nonchalantly and handed it to one of his servants and said, read. And then they read the exact verse that Srila Prabhupada had quoted. And devotees were amazed. Prabhupada didn't, the place was not marked. Prabhupada simply took the book, opened it, it was right there. Devotees in amazement at this transcendental magic, at Srila Prabhupada's abilities. In unison, everyone was, Jai Prabhupada. And I remember Prabhupada put his head back and Acha. You know, it was a very, Prabhupada was smiling and put his head back, yes. We were all extremely amazed. Still, it's amazing story.
I think Nitai asked a question. It's kind of cloudy in my head now, the circumstances, but he asked Prabhupada about, preaching. And Prabhupada explained to him, I'm kind of paraphrasing, so many years, that you find that little spark of interest that somebody has in Krishna, and that you feed that spark, help that spark grow. So, it's personalism. He's teaching personalism. You deal with each person as an individual and their personal experiences, and try to bring them into deeper levels, but knowing where they start, respecting where they are. So that was kind of a nice answer.
There was a time on Willard Street in San Francisco where he was trying to translate, but there was some noise in the apartment, and he wanted it stopped. And we could hear, there was no noise. It wasn't the outside traffic, it was too late. It was quiet. And we stopped, the few of us devotees stopped and tried to hear the noise, and he said, you don't hear it. We said, no. And we looked everywhere for dripping faucets. We looked, listening to pipes, and we couldn't find it. And then there was a hallway heater. And I looked in and I got down and I saw the pilot light, you know, going like this. And I turned the gas completely off. And Prabhupada from the room said, "That's it." So he was very sensitive. And when he heard the doors slam, he said he made reference to that, to breaking his heart. It broke his heart to hear the doors slam. And as Westerners, we'd come and go and slam doors and close them, and it just we learned that you just didn't do that around Prabhupada.
The devotees again traveled to Jaipur, and we were hosted at the various Gaudiya mouths in Jaipur. And one particular time, it was the noon arti. The Pujari was doing the arti, and Prabhupada was standing fairly close to the altar, and the devotees were somewhat back having a kirtan. So I was photographing Prabhupada at that time, and I noticed that he was looking around trying to catch someone's attention. The devotees were absorbed in the kirtan, so they didn't notice him, so he just caught my eye. So he called me over like this, and I went, since the kirtan was loud, I had to put my ear right next to his mouth to hear him. So he said, "Do you have any rupees?" So I put my mouth next to his ear and I said, "No, but I can get some. How much?" So again he said, he thought for a second, he said 10. So I went around and I found some devotee who was a little on the side, not so much participating, and I said, "Prabhupada wants 10 rupees. So immediately he gave me the 10 rupees. And the bill was flat at that point, and I went up and I handed it to Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada carefully folded it in half and folded it again, and he kept it with his folded palms. He kept the rupee note in his palms like this as the arti went on. And then at the end, the Pujari blew the conch shell, signaling the end of the arti. And Prabhupada took that 10 rupee note and put it in the donation box. So then I remembered, after that I had read, that when you come before Radha Krishna, you should make some offering. And Prabhupada was observing that etiquette at that point.
I remember Maharati's initiation in Paris. They had a little temple there. And at the time, Maharati didn't speak English. He had been a butcher and a boxer before he was a devotee. And when he went to take his beads, I guess somebody had told Prabhupada, I'm guessing. He went to take his beads from Prabhupada, and Prabhupada pulled his beads back. And he said, "So you'll not kill any more animals?" So somebody had to translate. Now, when Prabhupada pulled the beads back, I mean, here's this big guy. Maharati's a pretty big guy. He was a boxer. And he's just like, tiny little Prabhupada sitting on the Vyasasana. And here's this big guy just like shaking in his dhoti, you know. And then they translated for him, and he went. So Prabhupada gave him his beads. He said, "Your name is Maharati, one who can fight with many thousands of warriors." You know? So Prabhupada had that power to really shake people up. But he did it with love, because there was so much love. He knew the basis of it was love, because, you know, we rationalize so much Maya all the time. We don't. We're always perfect no matter what we do. And the spiritual master sees through that.
Thinking that sometimes all the other devotees, the servants would leave and I would be there fanning Srila Prabhupada. And I was thinking at one time, how is it that the spiritual master is sleeping? The Shastra says that the spiritual master never sleeps. So I was speculating and perhaps bothering Srila Prabhupada on a psychic level. Prabhupada was sitting there in his bed cross-legged in the inner veranda, the outer veranda on the outside in his rooms upstairs in Vrindavan. And he was seemingly snoring and in deep sleep. Lip was moving back and forth, and I thought, Prabhupada's snoring, he's sleeping. But I thought the spiritual master never sleeps. And as I'm thinking this nonsense, right in the middle of my thought, as Srila Prabhupada's snoring, he said, "What time is it?" Completely clear and attentive. And I realized then that Srila Prabhupada knew exactly what I was thinking and wanted to destroy that thought. 8:33 Srila Prabhupada. And immediately in my mind I just, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. I realized I shouldn't think anything in front of my spiritual master except Krishna conscious thoughts, love and devotion, and the Maha Mantra, chanting of Hare Krishna.
We were helping him take a bath, and he went unconscious. And we were in the bath, and we were, beside ourselves, and we picked him up, and he came conscious, and Srila Prabhupada, you were unconscious. He goes, "No, I was not unconscious," he said. And then he began recollecting stories, he goes, of America. He had such appreciation and thankfulness for the American spirit, and that I saw some tears come. And then he looked and he said, "Do not think I'm crying over," I forget how he said it, but material idea.
I remember in South Africa, and I'd agitated Prabhupada again with photography. So I'd like to catch the mudras when he spoke. And that would only happen when he spoke, when he used his hands. So how can I take the picture while he's speaking if he didn't want me to speak? So I had to take the picture. Even though he was speaking, I'd have to take the chance that it would irritate him, and I usually would. And he'd get real mad at me. And he said it would break his chain of thought. But I was impulsive, so I would do it. And in South Africa, he got a bunch of his books, the Bhagavatams, first editions of I think it was the 5th canto, and 4th and 5th. Yeah, I think 4th and 5th. A bunch of them came together. And Prabhupada was really pleased. It was just real beautiful to watch how he opened the books and handled them, so delicately. And it was like, the Bhagavatam was Krishna for Prabhupada, it really was. It wasn't his books. He handled them with such delicacy, and such respect. It was like he was dealing with a deity. It wasn't that he was dealing with his own literature. So that was kind of impressive. So I was snapping away because it was like Christmas morning for a kid when Prabhupada would get his books. New editions would come out. And I snapped one time too many, and Prabhupada snapped. And he got on my case. And I sat down next to Prabhupada. I said, "Prabhupada, I'm such a fool." He said, "If you're a fool, then go away. That is my order." So a lot of us were so emotional towards Prabhupada that I really took it heavily. And I walked out of the room, and then I thought somebody asked whether I should go to this speaking engagement with Prabhupada, which was at Wits University in South Africa, in Joburg, Johannesburg. It was a very prestigious speaking engagement. And I thought Prabhupada said no. So I put down my camera and my flash, and I just walked out of the temple. And I was really feeling devastated. And it was kind of crazy, and I look back at it now, but I was so emotional. I was thinking, should I commit suicide? Please, displease Prabhupada. Should I go to, the Sangam at Prayag and commit suicide there? Should I exile myself and just stay here for the rest of my life and do some humble service? So my mind is going back and forth like that. I know it sounds funny. And I walked for about 4 hours, from about 6 till about 10 o'clock. And then I kind of came out of all this emotional stuff, and I realized, Prabhupada never excommunicate me for taking too many photographs. And so it took me another half hour, and I found a telephone, and Pusta Krishna came and picked me up. And I was feeling really bad. And then next morning, Prabhupada calls me in, and he asked me, "Well, how come you didn't come to the engagement last night?" I said, "Well, Prabhupada, I thought you said I shouldn't come." And Prabhupada said, "I never said you shouldn't come. And even if I said you shouldn't come, still you should have come." So you know, you could just feel a lot of love there. And then he suddenly changed the mood of it, and then he just started speaking about the importance of his books, and that story about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta telling them they can rip the marble out from the temple to print books, how important the printing of books were. But I was feeling so overwhelmed that I put Prabhupada through, you know, some anxiety over this. I didn't realize it. I didn't think it was much anxiety, but it's more of embarrassment than anything else. So I kind of, when Harikesh came into the room, I kind of crawled out again. And then that evening, there was a second engagement at Wits University. And this is a very, very prestigious university. I think it was John Kennedy spoke there. And there was this Indian Life member, and he was a photographer, and he came out. I said, "Oh, well, what happened to you? Prabhupada was really worried yesterday. He wanted to know where you were." Then I really felt bad. But it was, I felt bad and I felt good at the same time, because I felt bad that I had put Prabhupada in anxiety, but it felt good that Prabhupada, you know, had that much appreciation for me. They noticed that I was missing. Of course, that night I shot with a 135 millimeter lens from as long away as possible.
I was photographing Srila Prabhupada here in Los Angeles while he was sitting on the Vyasa-san. And Rameshwar had asked me to take pictures of Srila Prabhupada with his eyes open, because they were for the various Chaitanya Charitamritas and Bhagavatams, and he felt it was more suitable. So at this point, I wouldn't take pictures during the lecture, because the flash and the shutter disturbed Prabhupada, so I would take them during the Radhamadhava prayers. And this particular day, Prabhupada had his eyes tightly shut for a long, long time. So I was just sitting, waiting for him to open his eyes. And it went on, you know, for many, many mantras. And then, quite unexpectedly, I felt this thump on my backside. And I looked around, and a sannyasi had hit me with his danda, indicating that I had been there long enough and I should move on. That was the spot for all the sannyasis. And there I was, you know, right at his feet. So I looked at Prabhupada, and at that moment he had his eyes open, and he had seen what had transpired. And he looked at the sannyasi with the most harsh, stern look, like a very displeased father. And I was grateful that that look had not been cast upon me, because it was withering. And then he looked at me, and I took my pictures, and then I did leave. And I was more amazed. Besides that pastime, what amazed me even more than that was, although the temple room was packed, people had come from all over the West Coast for this occasion. No one said anything to me. No one remarked, "Hey, I saw that, blah, blah." It was mystical that had happened in a room full of devotees, hundreds of devotees, and no one had seen it. It was between the three of us.
I was getting ready, and as he was taking, he called me, Upendra, and I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." And he said, "Reach in my pocket and take out the money there." And I reached in, and there were $20, $10, two $10 bills. And he said, "Give one." No, he said, "Give one to your son." And I'm not sure if he said, I had a daughter too at the time, and he gave the other one to your daughter. I said, "Srila Prabhupada, I cannot take from my spiritual master." He goes, "I am not their spiritual master, I am your spiritual master, and I'm telling you, give that to your children." And then later in Laguna Beach, my son wandered in, and he called him over. He loved children, just loved them. And I think gave him some coins.
I remember in Bombay, Prabhupada was speaking with an Indian gentleman, and it was myself and the Indian gentleman and Prabhupada in the room. And Prabhupada mentioned that he had a son that was mentally retarded, and I never heard of that before. And he said when he was, I guess, about 14, I can't remember the exact age, he just wandered off one day, and they never saw him again. So that was kind of an insight, you know. Prabhupada knew well the suffering of the material world, you know. And I kind of never forgot that. And I've told other people who have special children, you know, that Prabhupada had a special child. I I didn't usually tell him that part, that he just walked off. But it's kind of interesting. You know, Prabhupada had really felt the brunt of the world.
We did write one letter. I was a Sankirtan devotee, so in those days we were told, don't bother Srila Prabhupada, he's busy translating, he's busy traveling, just any questions that you have, any problems, go to your local GBC, talk to the sannyasis. So in 1974, after we were already initiated, we were doing Sankirtan in Spokane at the Spokane World's Fair I think it was April of 1974. And there were many Sankirtan devotees that were there doing the book distribution there. So the temple president had written one letter to Srila Prabhupada inviting him to come and speak at the World's Fair. And then we had written a letter from the Sankirtan side giving Srila Prabhupada the information of how many books were being distributed and how the Sankirtan was going there at that time. This was the only letter we really ever wrote to Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada responded in a letter a few weeks later in 1974, April of 74, that to the questions of the temple president, the invitation of the temple president, he responded that if you simply distribute my books, distribute prasadam, and have Harinam, it will be as good as my personally being there. And then from our letter, it was a response that we've never forgotten, a response that we were waiting to hear some kind of instruction like this, direct instruction. Prabhupada had said in that letter that I'm very keen on the distribution of my books, and I'm ever indebted to all of you for your untiring efforts to see that every man and woman in the United States gets a book. So, of course, when we got this letter, any letters that we heard from Srila Prabhupada to anyone were extremely enlivening and gave us purpose and direction. And this particular letter, many of the devotees that were there, Savas Prabhu and Tripurari Maharaj at the time, so many book distributors, Magendra was there from here, a lot of devotees that are around, they took that this is their mission for Srila Prabhupada throughout this lifetime, to make sure that every man and woman in the United States gets a book. So that was a nice letter, a very nice letter in 74.
Again, in Bombay in the early days, in the early 70s, Prabhupada would go just before dawn, really, when it was still quite dark. He would go down the steps of the house where he was living and walk to the Juhu beach for his morning walk. So every day I would go with him, and I would meet him when he came down the stairs. So one morning I was sitting on a landing, just chanting. And I didn't hear, it was dark, I couldn't see very well, and I didn't hear Prabhupada coming. He came very softly. And as he passed right in front of me, I could have touched him with my arm. He said, "Oh, thank you very much." And all I was doing was chanting japa. He was so appreciative and encouraging of a small effort.
So I'd get into like a little depression every now and then, and one time I was doing that in the manner while kirtan was going on, and I drifted into my mind into depression. I was kind of moping there, moving back and forth, slowly. Everybody else is dancing in ecstasy, And I look up and Prabhupada looks at me and he goes, and all of a sudden I felt this wave go through me and I started dancing like a wild man. It's real interesting, that Prabhupada would reach out to you like that. There was, 150 other souls in the room, and he'd just reach out to you, and I'm sure every other devotee in that room had his personal connection with Prabhupada. It was just, that was what was so special. And another time I was feeling that depression and lamentation, and I was just in his room, and I thought, if I came on like that Prabhupada would chastise me, or he'd feel disturbed that so much of his time was being wasted. And he was just real sweet to me, and he talked to me just like you'd preach to a new devotee, to be patient, to follow the 4 regular principles, and everything would work out. And just very sweetly. He could see how fragile I was. So that also impressed me, that someone can be very learned and educated, and at the same time keep that sensitivity an emotional sensitivity towards others.
I once spoke to him about, can you speak anything on this tape? About masturbation. And I was so ashamed. And so I talked to Prabhupada. And instead of being chastised or looking disgusted at me, he said, we are all accustomed to such nasty habits. But his way of saying it made it small, and why trouble, you know? I remember him asking Gargamuni, do you have sex desire? And instead of saying no, he said yes. And Prabhupada said, what do you do? He goes, I tolerate it. And Prabhupada said, yes, just tolerate.
So I believe that one Mataji had asked Srila Prabhupada a question about the women being very aggressive. Of course, I think this came up in a letter also, but I believe that this came up at that time also. And Srila Prabhupada responded that, yes, we should, for the Matajis, he was giving instruction, we can be a lion on the chase and a lamb at home. At that same time, Srila Prabhupada was shown a very famous cartoon that was in the Chicago Sun-Times, I believe, that summer. We had just received it. It had just come out, as a matter of fact. And I believe Jayatirtha gave the cartoon, showed the cartoon to Srila Prabhupada. And in the first frame of the cartoon, it showed a devotee approaching a traveler, a passenger, at the airport or in some spot. The second frame showed the passenger, you know, denying the book, not wanting to take it. In the third frame of the cartoon, there was the scuffle, pow, bam, kaboom. In the next frame, it showed the Bhagavatam, the book, in the traveler's neck, down the traveler's neck, and the devotee walking away, I believe, counting some money. So we were fearful that Srila Prabhupada would find this offensive and would be upset with our zealousness in distributing by seeing this caricature of the devotee's distribution. But on the contrary, Srila Prabhupada laughed and seemed to be amused and pleased with the cartoon.
So this is, again, a morning walk in Bombay. And a woman life member was taking a small group of us so Prabhupada could walk in a pleasant area. And after the walk, we all piled back in the car, and it happens very often in India, practically every time. Some beggars came to the car, a woman carrying a small child, and she had other children with her, you know, very much in need of assistance. And she was begging from Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada took some paisa and put it in the hands of all these different children and the woman. And, you know, I had read Bhagavad Gita and Charity and the Mode of Ignorance and all that. So I thought, I had the audacity to ask Srila Prabhupada, why are we giving money to beggars? And Srila Prabhupada didn't say anything. And so I immediately felt that I had been, you know, made some offensive remark. So I answered my own question, you know, there was just silence, and I said, is it because this is transcendental? And he said, yes. So from that I could understand, coming from his hand, from the hand of the pure devotee, it may be a different category coming from someone else's hand. But it was a wonderfully instructive moment as well.
So he said there are two kinds of cities. He said Sadhan city and Kripa city. And he said Sadhan city, someone follows the rules and regulations of devotional service with the aim of pleasing Krishna. And by the mercy of Krishna, he may become perfect. And he said sometimes someone is not able to follow all the rules and regulations of devotional service, but he has an overwhelming desire to perform some great service for Krishna. So he may also become perfect by the mercy of Krishna. And he said, just like Clive, he went to India for the British East India Company, just as a ship's cabin boy. But later on, because of his political and military exploits, he was very influential into bringing large parts of India into the British Empire. So because of that service, the British Empire recognized him and made him a lord. So he gave that example.
I guess you have to get a massage to learn a massage. So a movement that he'd want, he'd massage me, and I understood, and then I'd continue. And he never lay down for massage. I guess it's more sattvic to sit during a massage. You sit and start with the feet and work up, stomach and then back, and arms and then back, and the head finally. The head took the longest, and it was the easiest too. It took a lot of energy. Prabhupada could take a strong massage. And I think massage and walking started ardently after his first illness or heart attack in New York. And he could outwalk some of us on the beach. We'd get tuckered out, and he'd keep on going.
In Bombay one time, and Thai was massaging Prabhupada up on the roof. And I don't know, should I mention names? Or should the names be... I probably shouldn't mention names because they're my godbrothers. And anyway, there were two GBCs, and they always had this kind of conflict, ego conflict. And one came to see Prabhupada because he'd gotten something on the other. He was really coming in there, and he was really gloating, I got him. And Prabhupada was getting massaged, and he told him what it was. And then Prabhupada got real upset. And he said, I give him a little, I give him a little power, and they go, do this, do this, do this. And he said, no. He said, first you get them to love you. He said, then they'll do whatever you want. And so it was a real interesting insight into how Prabhupada thought. And then just after that, I think that's when I had just come to India. I'm trying to remember the chronology. But I was kind of looking for something to do. And I asked Prabhupada. And Prabhupada got really angry at me. It was just after this whole thing. And he said, what do you think I am, a question and answer machine, answering questions all day long? He said, read my books. All the answers are in my books. So again, I had to crawl off the roof. I was devastated by Prabhupada. And the tide that was downstairs, and he was laughing. Prabhupada had just blasted me, But, I was kind of upset because I didn't expect something like that. But, when I look back in retrospect, Prabhupada was really affected by all this politics. As much as we are affected by the politics, it really hurt his heart, too. He just couldn't be there on one level for everybody, and he was trying to train up his disciples. And when they'd screw up in bad ways, I actually think it took years off of Prabhupada's life. I mean, you can say it's speculative. But he did care. What could he do? There were so many disciples.
At some point, Prabhupada would spend many hours looking for suitable land for our temple in Juhu. And he was living at the home of a life member, Kartikeya Mahadevya, a very wonderful person with his family. And he gave Srila Prabhupada all facility. And in the evenings, Prabhupada would lecture in his home. And occasionally guests would come, besides the regular devotees, guests would come. And on one occasion, this guest was a sadhu of sorts. At least he presented himself as a sadhu. And Prabhupada observed him, and I also noticed Prabhupada was observing this person. And the person was looking at Prabhupada's female disciples. It became noticeable. After it wasn't that obvious, but if you just looked at him for a little while, you could see. So in the course of his lecture, Prabhupada recited the verse by King Kulashekar that after I've been engaged in chanting these names of Krishna, when I think of sex life, my face turns and I spit on the thought. He said that in Sanskrit. And he asked the sadhu, what is the meaning of this? And the sadhu, he said some other meaning. He didn't say, he was thinking of another shloka. he didn't give the translation for that shloka. And Prabhupada said, no, no. And he gave the proper translation. And to me, again, this was Prabhupada's gentlemanly way of making a clear point and helping this person.
A man named Ghosh came to see Prabhupada. He was the chief minister of Bengal. Taran Kanti Ghosh was his name. And I think it was his grandfather's, or his great-grandfather, was a real famous writer in India. He was a good friend of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he wrote a beautiful book on Lord Chaitanya, Lord Gauranga, or Salvation for All, some plays about Lord Chaitanya, and his style of writing was exquisite, exquisite. I mean, you're reading this, you don't think this is some Bengali writing it, some Indian, you're thinking this is some writer. You know, it's totally masterful with his expressions and his way with words and descriptions. Anyway, his grandson or great-grandson had become the chief minister of Bengal. He was a booster of Prabhupada. He loved Prabhupada. He came to see Prabhupada, and he was praising Prabhupada. He'd been to Bhagavan Rajneesh's ashram, and he told Prabhupada, he said, "You're the only one preaching the real Dharma of India." And then, even these big people have problems, you know, and he opens up to Prabhupada his problem. And then he was running for office, and he was complaining to Prabhupada that there were so many political parties. And Prabhupada just looked at him and said, "Democracy is no good." And then he said, and then Taran Kanti Ghosh was kind of like stunned. And then he said, that's when he said, "Oh, they're just because there's so many political parties." And Prabhupada said, "No, democracy is no good." So it kind of stunned him. He didn't know what to say, you know, because the spiritual master has to speak the truth, and Prabhupada was kind of a, you know, a spiritual royalist. He felt, you know, democracy creates power politics, which is like a very inefficient form of government. So he was very straightforward with him. When Taran Kanti Ghosh couldn't do anything, you know, it's just like, here's somebody speaking the truth. You know, it's just like not open to debate when Prabhupada would say something like that, because it was so right on, you know. And then afterwards, he went and sat down next to Prabhupada, and he put his head on Prabhupada's lap, and Prabhupada was rubbing his head like a little kid, and he was just there just enjoying getting his head rubbed, you know. He was this big, powerful guy, you know, the equivalent of the governor of the state of West Bengal, you know. And he was just enjoying Prabhupada's rubbing his head like a kid.
When they would read the letters to Srila Prabhupada, there were a few letters that were very outstanding. I remember one letter that they had read, we had the fortune of being there, when they would read the letters to Srila Prabhupada. And one letter they were discussing of the preaching activities of Srila Prabhupada's disciples in Yugoslavia. And they had given description of how the people would leave with their, would be given prasad, Harinam, and books, and as they would leave with their hands full of books, their stomachs full of prasadam, and their purses emptied. And Srila Prabhupada responded, "This was my program. Hands full, stomachs full, and purses emptied." Prabhupada said, "That's my program." And then Prabhupada said that when I hear the stories of their preaching, I forget about my diseased condition. It makes me feel very happy. And another time there was some different achievements that were taking place, a restaurant that had been opened in South Africa, another activity that was going on, and Srila Prabhupada said, "When I hear of the achievements of my disciples, my chest swells with pride for them." So there were little statements at that time that Srila Prabhupada was making that were that ring through, and will ring through, I'm sure, for decades and centuries.
So in Bombay, it was a very sad day, one day, and that was on the 28th of September, 1977. I got a phone call from Giriraj Swami, and that was at about 4:30 in the morning. And the most sad thing I heard from Giriraj Maharaj, he was crying on the phone, and he said, "I want you to bring your big," in those days I had a big Dodge car. It was one of those huge cars, and you know, the Americans used to make, where even you could sleep at the back. And he said, Prabhupada wants to leave his body. And I said, what? I never heard anybody say that somebody wants to leave his body. It sounded more like, you know, he wanted to commit suicide or something. I said, what do you mean Prabhupada wants to leave his body? Where does he want to leave his body? He said he wants to go to Vrindavan, and he's leaving his body. He's going away. And we have to drop him at the station. But his body, because he hadn't eaten for nearly 6 months, he lived only on juice and charanamrit. So his body had depleted. There were hardly any muscles, and the bones and these veins were pressing, and it was very painful. So here was a person whom I had fought, and I had argued with. He was like a lion. He was a very, very fine debater. He could defeat anyone on the matter of philosophy. And then suddenly, when I saw Prabhupada that morning, I saw that he was very, very thin, and it's like Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he had withdrawn himself, like a tortoise withdraws himself. So this morning, that's 28th September 1977, Srila Prabhupada decided to leave, and so for the first time I cleaned my car, because I didn't want Prabhupada to sleep in an unclean car. My wife arranged a nice silk bedding, and we had flowers and incenses. I drove to the temple, and there several things happened. Number one, when Prabhupada was brought down from his quarters, it was in like a basket, a big basket, and reminded me of stories like Moses or Karna. They were brought in baskets and left in the river or something. And I could see, like, there were devotees crying, and they were all devastated is the only word I can say. Spiritually, they were very much feeling intensely separation which was going to take place from Prabhupada. And I was supposed to drive, and I felt like a cruel, you know, a real cruel guy taking away Prabhupada away from the devotees. But that was my duty, I had to do that. So I was in the front driving. Next to me was Brahmananda Swami, he was quite big, and next to him was Tamal Krishna Swami, who was Prabhupada's last secretary, and finally it was Giriraj Maharaj. 4 of us, it was such a huge big car, 4 people could sit in the front. There were no bucket seats in those days. And there was, you know, steering and the stick shift up in the steering wheel. And Prabhupada was resting at the back fully, and Upendra was his last servant. He was sitting down on the floor level of the car, and Prabhupada's luggage was behind. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj, like a school teacher, told me, drive very slowly. Don't drive fast, because in the Bombay roads there are potholes, and Prabhupada will be very uncomfortable. So I said, fine. So I just asked them, we are going to Bombay Central Station, and which train are we going to catch? Prabhupada's taking the Mathura Express. He was supposed to go to Vrindavan. So now, mind you, this was from 4:30 and till 8 o'clock I had not had any water or anything, and then 9 o'clock, and then this was quite hot. Prabhupada was in the car, and we were driving very slowly. Upendra from the back told me, Prabhupada wants you to drive faster. So I said, okay, if Prabhupada wants me to drive faster, I'll drive fast. I had been a rally driver when I was young, and I could drive real fast. So I just picked up the speed. And in those days, these were huge, big cars with big guzzlers, you know, gas guzzlers. They could just move. The moment I pressed the accelerator, Tamal Krishna Maharaj got very upset. He said, I told you to go slow. what are you doing? So I said, well, I was just told by Upendra at the back that Prabhupada wants me to drive faster. So no, go slow. So I slowed down again. True enough, within a minute, Upendra was again telling me, Prabhupada had said, go faster. Now, why aren't you going faster? Now, I was getting, so I said, the real person I have to serve is Prabhupada, let me drive faster. And I said to Tamal Krishna Maharaj, you sort this out with Upendra and allow me to drive. So we reached, what we thought was, we reached too early to the Bombay Central Station. So myself and Ram Tulsi, another devotee there, we went to the station master to get the wheelchair for Prabhupada, to transport him from my car to the railway in his special cabin. So I just, by my usual style, I asked the station master, this Mathura Express is going at 11 o'clock? He said, didn't you read today's newspaper? It's 10:30. The timing has just got changed today. And I looked at my watch and I said, there are 5 minutes left. The train's going to go in 5 minutes. Ram Tulsi and I ran with the wheelchair. And I told that station master, I'll pay you anything, but stop that train. Don't start it till I tell you. And he said, what? I've never had such a request. I said, there's a big team coming and there's a very holy person and he's going to leave his body in Vrindavan and he has to be on that train. He said, leave his body? What do you mean? I said, just run with me. And so we were running. I was quite young then. I'm now 57, but at that time I was 37, 20 years ago, yes. So we put Prabhupada in there. Oh, I told Giriraj Maharaj, you guys goofed. It's, the train's going half an hour early today. He says, no, it's there in the timetable. I said, whatever is in the paper, that doesn't matter. The station master is going to blow his whistle and the train's going to go. So we better take Prabhupada with us. So we ran. Some of the devotees got the thing ready for Prabhupada in his special cabin, which was non-air conditioned. Should have been air conditioned cabin, but for some reason they booked non-air conditioned. And then we took Prabhupada, and just a few minutes before the train was about to leave, he was comfortably sleeping in his compartment. Now, mind you, this was already nearly 10:30 and I was so thirsty. So I'd just gone to pick up a soda bottle from the stand at the railway. And Prabhupada's servant Upendra says, Prabhupada's calling you inside. So I just left that soda bottle and I went in the cabin, wondering why is Prabhupada calling me. And Prabhupada said, come closer. So I went very close to him and he said, I want to thank you for driving me. And it was very touching because he was in so much pain. He was just about to give up his body. I had done nothing much except this. So right there in the train in front of everyone, I just offered my obeisances, caught Prabhupada's lotus feet. Tamal Krishna Maharaj and others, don't touch his feet. I said, no, this is it. This is the last moment I'll ever get. And I said, Prabhupada, I surrender to you. You are my spiritual master. And he put his hand in my hair and blessed me. He actually he got up with little pressure on his elbow and he was smiling sweetly. The train started. And some of the devotees said, look, the train started and you better jump off, otherwise the next station is, quite far away. Reluctantly, I jumped off the train, the moving train, and I kept watching the train till the last bogie had left. And I wasn't thirsty anymore and I couldn't care for the bottle. Then when I got into the car with tears in my eyes, lo and behold, there was Prabhupada's garland on the steering wheel. He'd not forgotten. So that's it. That was the last I met Prabhupada, and from 71 to 77, And whatever I did, my memories of Prabhupada is just basically I was fighting him. It was more arguing, fighting, and surrendering at the end. Hare Krishna.
Hare Rama Krishna Jata Maya